that stopped you from taking a great new job? That is the basement ghost banging on the floorboards. It wants to be seen. It wants to be let out. Jung realized that you don't become a better person by trying to be perfect. You become a whole person by opening the basement door and inviting the ghost up for tea. The strange case of the hidden self. In the late 1800s, a writer named Robert Louis Stevenson had a dream. He had been sick in bed, struggling to write something meaningful. In his dream, he saw a man drink a potion and turn into a monster. When he woke up, he wrote the story of the strange case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Dr. Jekyll is a perfect man. He is a doctor, he is polite, and everyone likes him. But he has secret desires that he thinks are bad. He wants to be wild. He wants to stop being so good all the time. To solve this, he creates a potion that turns him into Mr. Hyde. Mr. Hyde is everything Jekyll hides. He is small, hairy, and mean. At first, Jekyll loves being Hyde. It feels like a vacation from being perfect. But soon, Hyde starts taking over. He becomes stronger than Jekyll. Eventually, Jekyll can't turn back. This story is a perfect example of what happens when we ignore our shadow. When we try to be 100% good, our shadow becomes 100% bad. The more we pretend we don't have dark feelings, the more those feelings control us when we aren't looking. Shadow work is the process of making sure we don't end up like Dr. Jekyll. It is the practice of looking at our Hyde and saying, "I see you. You are part of me. How can we work together?" Alina's Sunday morning realization. On a quiet Sunday morning in Austin, Texas, Elena Rodriguez sat at her kitchen table. The sun was shining through the window, hitting a stack of design books she hadn't touched in weeks. Usually, this would be the time she would start procrastinating, cleaning the baseboards, or organizing her spice rack to avoid the big project due on Monday. But today was different. She had started a shadow journal. She opened a notebook and followed a simple instruction she had read: write down 3 things you hate about other people. Elena didn't have to think hard. She thought of Sarah, a woman she worked with. Sarah was loud. She always talked about her wins. She walked into meetings like she owned the room. Elena wrote down, "I hate how Sarah is so arrogant. I hate how she always wants to be the center of attention. I hate that she thinks she is better than everyone else." Then Elena stopped. She looked at the words. She felt a weird tightness in her chest. She remembered what Jung said about projection. He said that we don't actually see the world as it is. We see the world as we are. When we have a very strong, hot reaction to someone else's behavior, it's usually because they are showing a trait that we have locked in our own basement. Elena looked at the word, arrogant. She asked herself a hard question: when was the last time I let myself feel proud of my work? The answer was never. Elena was so afraid of being arrogant that she never even told her boss when she did something great. She stayed quiet. She stayed small. She realized that she didn't actually hate Sarah. She was jealous of Sarah. Sarah had the confidence that Elena had locked away in her basement years ago because her mother had told her not to be a show-off. By calling Sarah arrogant, Elena was able to keep her own basement door locked. But it was also keeping her from getting the promotion she wanted. Her basement ghost wasn't a monster, it was her own lost confidence. Finding the gold in the dark. We often think the shadow is only made of bad things like anger or greed. But Jung taught that the shadow also contains gold. Imagine you are a very creative child who loves to paint on the walls. Your parents get upset. They tell you that you are being messy and disobedient. Because you want their love, you stop painting. You put your creativity in the basement because it feels dangerous. 20 years later, you are an adult working a boring office job. You feel empty and tired. You don't know why. The reason is that your creativity, your gold, is still locked in the basement. Shadow work isn't just about facing your flaws. It's about rescuing your gifts. Many people who struggle with overthinking and self-sabotage are actually very powerful, creative, and brave people who were told that those traits were too much. When you start to look into your shadow, you might find that your anger is actually your ability to stand up for yourself. You might find that your selfishness is actually your ability to take care of your own needs. The goal isn't to become a perfect person. The goal is to become a whole person. A whole person knows they have a temper, so they use that energy to fight for what is right. A whole person knows they want attention, so they use that desire to become a great teacher or leader. How to start the conversation. Shadow work can feel scary, but it doesn't have to be done all at once. You don't have to build a stone tower in Switzerland. You can start right where you are. The first step is to notice your triggers. A trigger is when you have an emotional reaction that is much bigger than the situation deserves. If someone cuts you off in traffic and you feel like you want to scream for an hour, that is a trigger. If a friend forgets to text you back and you feel like they hate you, that is a trigger. These are the moments when the basement door has cracked open. Instead of pushing the feeling away, try the 3-2-1 shadow process. This is a tool used by many modern psychologists to help people integrate their hidden parts. Face it, the third person. Think of a person who bothers you or a dream figure that scared you. Describe them in detail. Use he or she. Talk about what you dislike about them. Be honest. Don't be nice. Talk to it, the second person. Imagine this person is sitting in a chair across from you. Talk to them. Ask them, why are you here? What do you want from me? What are you trying to show me? In your mind, imagine what they would say back. Be it, the first person. This is the hardest part. Try to become that person for a moment. Use I statements. If you were describing a greedy person, say, I am greedy. I want more. I never feel like I have enough. When you do this, you might feel a shift. You might realize that the greedy part of you is actually just a part of you that feels very unsafe and needs security. Once you know that, you can find healthy ways to feel safe without sabotaging your life. The basement ghost is just you. There is a common fear that if we look at our shadow, we will find out we are evil. This is the biggest myth of all. Jung found that when he finally stopped fighting his visions and started talking to them, they changed. The monsters turned into people. The scary voices turned into wisdom. He realized that the ghost in the basement wasn't an enemy. It was just a part of him that had been lonely for a long time. Self-sabotage is often just a lonely part of you trying to get your attention. If you ignore your need for rest, your shadow will make you get sick, so you have to rest. If you ignore your need for respect, your shadow will make you snap at your boss, so you are forced to deal with the problem. Shadow work is a way to stop the explosions by having regular conversations. It is the path to emotional freedom because it means you no longer have to spend all your energy holding the basement door shut. You can use that energy to build your life instead. The historical echo. Jung finished his work on the Red Book and eventually moved back into the world. He didn't stay in the tower forever. He used what he learned to help thousands of people. He showed them that their symptoms weren't mistakes, they were messages. Today, we live in a world that is very much like Dr. Jekyll. On social media, we only show our best lives. We use filters to hide our faces and carefully chosen words to hide our thoughts. We are more perfect on the outside than ever before. But on the inside, we are more anxious than ever. We are sabotaging our relationships and our health because our shadows are screaming to be seen. We are trying to live in a house where the basement is overflowing, and we are pretending we don't hear the noise. The solution hasn't changed since 1913. It is still about the courage to look into the dark. It is about realizing that you cannot be free until you are whole. When you stop trying to kill your demons and start trying to understand them, something amazing happens. You stop being a passenger in your own mind. You become the captain. You realize that the basement ghost was never there to haunt you. It was just waiting for you to come home and turn on the light. 3. Silencing the voice of the inner critic. The air in the drawing room smelled of expensive lavender water and the faint metallic scent of a cold fireplace. 8-year-old Eleanor stood by the heavy velvet curtains, her back straight and her hands clasped tightly behind her. She wore a dress with stiff lace that scratched her neck, and her black stockings felt like a second, tighter skin. Across the room, her mother, Anna, sat in a chair that looked like a throne. Anna was beautiful, the kind of woman people stopped to stare at in the streets of New York. She looked at her daughter and sighed. It was a soft sound, but it carried the weight of a lead weights. "You are such a funny, ugly little thing," Anna said, her voice like silk. "You are just a little granny." The nickname stuck. It wasn't meant to be sweet. It was a label for a child who was too serious, too plain, and too awkward to fit into the sparkling world of high society. Eleanor didn't cry. Instead, she let the words sink into her bones. She began to believe that her only job was to be invisible so she wouldn't embarrass her beautiful mother. This was the birth of a voice that would follow her for decades. It was a voice that whispered in her ear every time she tried to speak up or stand tall. It told her she was a failure before she even started. It told her that the world was a jury, and she had already been found guilty of being not enough. The guard dog in the dark. That voice in Eleanor's head is the same one that lives in the back of your mind. We often call it the inner critic, but it's more like a guard dog that has been locked in a dark room for too long. It barks at everything, the mailman, a falling leaf, or even the wind. It thinks it is protecting you, but all it does is keep you from sleeping. In psychology, we call this the protective intent. Your brain is not trying to make you miserable on purpose. It is actually trying to keep you safe from a very specific kind of pain, the pain of being rejected by other people. Thousands of years ago, if your tribe didn't like you, they might kick you out into the wild. Being alone meant you wouldn't survive for long. To prevent this, your brain developed a critic to spot your flaws before anyone else could. It thinks that if it punishes you first, you will work harder to be perfect, and then no one will ever have a reason to leave you. The problem is that this system is outdated. We no longer live in small tribes where one mistake means death. Yet, the brain still reacts to a typo in an email or a social slip-up as if a tiger is at the door. It activates the default mode network. This is a group of areas in the brain that turn on when you aren't focused on a specific task. When you're just sitting there, your brain starts mind-wandering. For most people who struggle with self-sabotage, that wandering leads straight to a list of everything they did wrong today. The shattered mug. Elena Rodriguez knew this mind-wandering all too well. She was standing in the communal kitchen at her fintech office in Austin. The room was bright and smelled of roasted coffee beans and expensive cleaning spray. Elena was holding her favorite ceramic mug, the one with the hand-painted blue swirls she'd bought on a trip to Marfa. Her mind was miles away, worrying about a design presentation she had to give in an hour. Her fingers slipped. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet kitchen. The mug hit the tile floor and exploded into dozens of jagged blue pieces. A splash of cold coffee soaked into her white sneakers. Immediately, the voice screamed, "You are so clumsy. Everyone is looking at you. They think you're a mess. If you can't even hold a mug, how are you going to lead a multi-million-dollar project? You're a fraud, Elena. They're all going to find out today." Her face turned a deep, hot red. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She felt a familiar urge to run out of the building, get in her car, and drive until she hit the desert. This was the basement ghost, the part of her shadow that lived in fear of being seen as imperfect. The ghost wasn't just making a noise, it was using the inner critic's voice to tell a story about her worth. But then Elena paused. She remembered a line she had read about Eleanor Roosevelt. She took a breath, a long, slow exhale. She looked at the blue shards on the floor. "It's just a mug," she whispered to herself. "I am not the mug." It sounds simple, but for Elena, it was a revolution. She was practicing cognitive diffusion. Instead of being inside the thought, feeling like she was the failure, she stepped back and looked at the thought. She realized that the thought, "I am a failure," was just a sentence made of words, not a fact written in stone. She grabbed a broom, swept up the pieces, and walked to her meeting. The voice was still there, murmuring in the background, but she had turned the volume down. Putting the critic on trial. To truly silence the critic, you have to stop treating its words like the gospel truth. You have to treat them like testimony in a courtroom. Most of us are very bad lawyers for ourselves. We let the prosecution, the inner critic, present evidence, without ever asking if that evidence is real. Imagine a courtroom inside your head. The inner critic stands up and says, "The defendant is a complete idiot because she made a mistake on slide 5. In the past, you would have just agreed. But now, you are the defense attorney. You have to demand evidence. Is this thought a fact or an opinion? A fact is something that can be proven in a lab or seen by everyone. I made a mistake on slide 5 is a fact. I am a complete idiot is an opinion. Opinions are not allowed as evidence of your worth. What is the protective intent here? Ask yourself, what is this voice trying to save me from? Usually, it's trying to save you from being embarrassed. Once you see the critic as a scared child trying to protect you, it becomes much harder to be afraid of it. Does this thought help me solve the problem? If the answer is no, the testimony is irrelevant. Calling yourself an idiot doesn't fix slide 5. It just makes your hands shake so you can't type the correction. This process is what Eleanor Roosevelt eventually had to do. As a young woman, she was painfully shy. When she married Franklin, she moved into a house controlled by her mother-in-law, Sarah. Sarah was much like Eleanor's mother, harsh and judgmental. For years, Eleanor lived as a shadow in her own home. She let the critics in her life dictate what she wore, how she raised her children, and what she believed about herself. She was the granny her mother had promised she would be. The turning point came not from a sudden burst of confidence, but from a sense of duty. Eleanor began working at the Rivington Street Settlement House, in a poor neighborhood of New York. The streets there were narrow and crowded. The air was thick with the smell of coal smoke and garbage. But in those cramped rooms, Eleanor saw people who were struggling with real life-and-death problems. They didn't care if she was plain or ugly. They cared that she was there to help. She realized that when she focused on her work, the voice of the inner critic grew quiet. It was as if the guard dog stopped barking because it saw she was busy doing something important. She started to realize that her value wasn't something people gave to her based on her looks or her grace. It was something she created through her actions. The default mode of kindness. We often think that being hard on ourselves is the only way to stay motivated. We worry that if we stop criticizing ourselves, we will become lazy and fail at everything. But science shows the opposite is true. When you criticize yourself, your brain releases cortisol, the stress hormone. High levels of cortisol shut down the smart part of your brain, the prefrontal cortex, and turn on the scared part, the amygdala. You can't think creatively or solve complex problems when your brain thinks it's being attacked by a predator, even if that predator is your own voice. To break this loop, you have to replace the criticism with something more functional. This isn't about positive thinking or lying to yourself. It's about functional realism. When Elena dropped the mug, a positive thinker might have said, "I'm glad I dropped it. Now I can buy a better one." That's a lie, and the brain knows it. A functional realist says, "I dropped the mug. I'm frustrated because I liked it. I need to clean it up so no one gets hurt. I am still a capable designer who is ready for her meeting." One is a fantasy, the other is a grounded truth. The callback, finding the voice. Eleanor Roosevelt eventually became one of the most famous speakers in the world. But even at the height of her power, she admitted that the granny voice never fully went away. It still whispered that she wasn't as smart as the men in the room, or as sophisticated as the other diplomats. The difference was that she no longer gave that voice her consent. She famously said, "No one can make you feel inferior without your consent." She understood that the voice was just a part of her history, a ghost from her mother's drawing room, but it didn't have to be her future. In 1921, when her husband was struck with polio, the critics were louder than ever. Her mother-in-law wanted Franklin to hide away in the country and live as an invalid. The inner critic told Eleanor she wasn't strong enough to lead the family or represent her husband in public. She was terrified of public speaking. Her voice would often go high and thin when she was nervous, making her sound like the frightened child she used to be. But she looked the fear in the face. She started small, speaking to small groups of women about politics. She went to the basement of her own mind and invited the ghost out into the light. She realized that the plainness her mother hated was actually a gift. Because she didn't look like a porcelain doll, people felt they could trust her. She looked like a real person who had known real struggle. The 24-hour practice. Silencing your critic isn't a one-time event. It is a daily practice of catching the voice and gently correcting it. Start by labeling the voice. When you notice yourself thinking, "I'm so stupid," stop and say, "I am having the thought that I am stupid." This small change in language creates a gap between you and the thought. Next, ask the courtroom questions. Is this a fact? Is it helpful? What is the protective intent? Finally, do the best friend reframe. If your best friend had dropped that mug or made that mistake, would you call them a failure? Would you tell them they were a fraud? Of course not. You would probably say, "Accidents happen. Let's get a broom." You deserve the same grace you give to others. Elena Rodriguez didn't become a perfect, fearless leader overnight. But a week after the mug incident, she sat in her boss's office. He offered her a chance to lead a new department. The old Elena, the one who listened to the granny voice, would have said she wasn't ready. She would have listed all her flaws before he could find them. Instead, she felt the familiar tightening in her chest. She heard the ghost start to mumble in the basement. She took a breath, felt the floor beneath her feet, and smiled. "I'd be happy to," she said. The critic barked once, then went back to sleep in the dark. Elena was too busy building her future to listen. 4. 4 pillars of nervous system regulation. The camp was quiet just before the sun came up. In those few minutes, the world felt still. The air was biting cold, and the ground was hard under the feet of the men waiting for the morning roll call. Viktor Frankl stood among them. He was a doctor, a man who had spent his life studying the human mind, but in this place his titles meant nothing. He was just a number stitched into a ragged coat. In these moments of silence, the tension was thick. Everyone knew what was coming. The shouting, the hunger, and the constant threat of death would soon break the peace. Most men lived in a state of total terror. Their bodies were stuck in a permanent fight-or-flight mode, even when they were trying to sleep. But as Frankl looked around, he noticed something strange. A few people weren't falling apart. Despite the horror, they were able to offer a kind word to someone else, or even give away their last piece of bread. Frankl realized that these people had found something hidden. They had found a small, invisible room inside their own minds. Even when the world outside was a nightmare, they could step into that room and choose how they felt. This realization changed everything for him. He saw that while the guards could take his clothes, his food, and his freedom, they couldn't take his ability to choose his internal reaction. This wasn't just a nice thought. It was a survival strategy. Frankl saw that the people who survived mentally were those who could create a gap between what was happening to them and how they responded. He later wrote that between the thing that happens to us and our reaction, there is a space. In that space lies our power to choose. This space is where our freedom lives. Most of us will never face the extreme conditions Frankl endured, but we face our own camps every day. We face the camp of a stressful job, the camp of a difficult relationship, or the camp of our own overthinking. When our boss sends a mean email, or when we make a mistake, our body reacts as if we are in physical danger. Our heart races. Our breath gets shallow. Our brain shuts down the parts that think clearly and turns on the parts that want to run away or fight. This is where self-sabotage begins. We act out of fear instead of wisdom because we haven't learned how to find the gap. The ghost in the machine. We have talked about the basement ghost. This is the part of us that holds onto old fears and hidden memories. When we feel overwhelmed, it's like the ghost is banging on the floorboards from the basement. You don't just think you are stressed, you feel it in your chest, your stomach, and your neck. This is your nervous system trying to protect you. Your nervous system is like an old-fashioned alarm system. Its only job is to keep you alive. It doesn't care if you are happy or if you get that promotion. It only cares that you aren't eaten by a lion. The problem is that your brain can't tell the difference between a lion and a deadline. When you get a scary thought, your body prepares for a physical battle. This is why you can't just think your way out of a panic attack or a spiral of overthinking. You can't tell a racing heart to just calm down using words alone. It's like trying to talk a fire alarm into turning itself off while the building is smoking. You have to go to the control panel and flip the switch. That control panel is your body. To find the gap Frankl talked about, you have to learn to regulate your nervous system. You have to teach your body that it is safe, so that your brain can start thinking clearly again. If you don't do this, you will always be a passenger in your own life. You will react to everything that happens to you, instead of choosing your path. The window of tolerance. Imagine a window. When you are inside this window, you feel okay. You might be busy or a little tired, but you can handle things. You can listen to people, you can solve problems, and you can feel your emotions without being drowned by them. This is called your window of tolerance. When something stressful happens, you might get pushed out of this window. You can go in two directions. The first direction is hyper-arousal. This is when you go up. You feel anxious, angry, or panicky. Your thoughts race, and you feel like you need to move or do something right now. This is the fight or flight response. This is where the inner critic is loudest, screaming that everything is a disaster. The second direction is hypoarousal. This is when you go down. You feel numb, frozen, or empty. You might feel like you are watching your life from far away. You have no energy, and you just want to sleep or disappear. This is the freeze response. Self-sabotage loves both of these states. When you are up, you might send an angry text you regret. When you are down, you might spend 3 days on the couch avoiding a project that scares you. To stop the sabotage, you have to get back inside the window. You have to find your way back to the gap where you are in control. Pillar 1, the power of the breath. The fastest way to flip the switch on your nervous system is through your breath. It is the only part of your survival system that you can control. You can't tell your heart to slow down, and you can't tell your stomach to stop churning, but you can control how much air you take in. When you are stressed, you take short, shallow breaths into your chest. This tells your brain, we are in trouble. Keep the alarm going. To turn the alarm off, you have to breathe deeply into your belly. There is a specific technique used by Navy SEALs called box breathing. These are people who have to stay calm in literal war zones. If it works for them while they are being shot at, it can work for you when you are stuck in traffic. Inhale slowly through your nose for a count of 4. Hold that breath in for a count of 4. Exhale slowly through your mouth for a count of 4. Hold your lungs empty for a count of 4. Another powerful tool is the physiological sigh. Scientists have found that this is the quickest way to lower your heart rate. You take a deep breath in through your nose, then at the very top, you take one more tiny sip of air to fully inflate your lungs. Then you let out a very long, slow exhale through your mouth. Doing this just 2 or 3 times can reset your system. It sends a physical signal to the brain that the danger has passed. Pillar 2, movement and the shaking reset. Sometimes, the energy of a fight or flight response gets stuck in the body. Have you ever noticed how a dog shakes its whole body after it gets into a scuffle or gets scared by a loud noise? It is literally shaking the stress out of its nervous system. Humans have forgotten how to do this. We tend to sit still and swallow our stress, which keeps the basement ghost banging on the floor. If you feel that up energy, that jitters or racing feeling, you need to move it. You don't need a gym. You just need to move your body in a way that tells your brain the battle is over. One of the most effective ways is simply shaking. Stand up and shake your hands. Shake your arms. Bounce on your heels. Let your shoulders go loose. It might feel silly, but it works. You are completing the stress cycle. Your body thinks, okay, we ran away from the lion, we moved our muscles, and now we are safe. If you are in the down state, the frozen, numb state, movement is even more important. Small movements like stretching your arms wide or walking around the room can help pull you back into your window of tolerance. You are telling your body that it is safe to come out of hiding. Pillar 3, grounding the senses. When we overthink, we are living entirely in our heads. We are either in the past, regretting something, or in the future, worrying about something. We are almost never in the present moment. Grounding is the act of pulling your soul back into your body. The most famous tool for this is the 5-4-3-2-1 technique. When you feel the gap closing and the panic rising, stop and name 5 things you can see: the lamp, the dust on the desk, the blue sky. 4 things you can feel: the weight of your feet on the floor, the fabric of your shirt. 3 things you can hear: the hum of the fridge, a bird outside, your own breath. 2 things you can smell: the coffee in your mug, the scent of the rain. 1 thing you can taste: the mint you had earlier or just the inside of your mouth. This forces your brain to switch from threat mode to observation mode. You cannot be fully present in your 5 senses and deeply panicked at the same time. The brain doesn't have enough processing power to do both. By focusing on the now, you widen the gap between the stress and your reaction. Pillar 4, temperature and the diving reflex. Sometimes the spiral is so fast that breathing and grounding don't feel like enough. This is when you need a hard reset. The fastest way to do this is with temperature. Humans have something called the mammalian dive reflex. When your face hits cold water, your brain automatically slows down your heart rate and moves blood toward your heart and brain to save your life. It is an ancient survival trick. If you feel a hijack coming on, if you are so angry or so anxious that you feel like you might explode, go to the sink. Splash ice-cold water on your face for 30 seconds. Or hold an ice cube in your hand until it melts. The intense cold forces your nervous system to pay attention to the physical sensation instead of the mental story. It breaks the loop. It gives you those few seconds of peace you need to choose a different response. Elena in the driver's seat. Elena Rodriguez sat in her car, her knuckles white as she gripped the steering wheel. She was stuck on the Mopac Expressway in Austin, and the traffic wasn't moving. In 45 minutes, she was supposed to give a presentation to the senior partners at her firm. This was the biggest moment of her career so far. Her basement ghost was having a field day. "You're going to be late," the voice whispered. "They'll think you're unprofessional. They'll realize you don't belong there. You're going to fail." Elena felt it in her body before she even processed the thoughts. Her chest felt tight, like a heavy stone was sitting on it. Her palms were so sweaty, they were slipping on the leather steering wheel. Her vision was starting to tunnel, focusing only on the red brake lights in front of her. She was sliding out of her window of tolerance and straight into hyperarousal. In the past, Elena would have called her boss and made an excuse. She would have sabotaged the opportunity to avoid the pain of the anxiety. But today, she remembered the gap. She let go of the steering wheel with one hand and placed it on her belly. She took a deep breath in through her nose, feeling her stomach push against her hand. Then she took that second sip of air, the physiological sigh, and let out a long, slow whistle of an exhale. She did it again. On the third exhale, she felt the stone on her chest lift just a little. "I am in a car," she said out loud, using the grounding technique. "I can see the green sign for the exit. I can feel the vibration of the engine. I can hear the radio." She wasn't cured of her anxiety, but she was no longer being steered by it. She had found the space Frankel talked about. In that space, she realized that being 5 minutes late wasn't a death sentence. She realized that she was prepared for the presentation. She used the gap to choose her response. She would call the office, tell them the situation calmly, and keep breathing. By the time she reached the parking garage, her heart was beating at a normal pace. She wasn't a victim of the traffic or her thoughts. She was the one in charge. Building your own gap. Finding the gap is a skill, not a gift. Viktor Frankl didn't wake up one day with the ability to stay calm in a concentration camp. He had spent years practicing how to observe his own mind. Elena didn't stop her panic attack by magic. She used tools she had practiced when she wasn't in a crisis. You cannot learn to swim while you are drowning. If you wait until you are in a total meltdown to try these pillars, they might not work as well. You have to practice them when the sun is out and the water is calm. Start by noticing your window of tolerance throughout the day. When you are washing the dishes, are you inside the window? When you are checking your email, do you feel yourself starting to drift toward the up or down states? The goal isn't to never feel stressed. That's impossible. The goal is to become self-regulated. This means that when you get pushed out of your window, you have the map and the tools to get back in. You stop being a person who reacts and start being a person who responds. When you master your nervous system, the inner critic loses its power. It can scream all it wants, but if your body is calm and your breath is deep, the critic has nothing to hook onto. You have invited the basement ghost upstairs for a talk, and you've realized that while the ghost can make noise, it can't actually hurt you. The freedom Frankl found wasn't about the world outside. It was about the world inside. When you own your gap, you own your life. You can walk into a room, a meeting, or a relationship, knowing that no matter what happens, you have the power to choose who you are going to be in that moment. The air in the car was cool now. Elena stepped out, straightened her blazer, and walked toward the elevator. She felt the ground under her feet. She felt the air in her lungs. She was ready. Not because the fear was gone, but because she knew exactly what to do with it. She had found the space. And in that space, she was finally free. 5. The Midnight Voyage of the Vasa. From a high hilltop overlooking the harbor in Stockholm, the world looked like a celebration. It was August 10, 1628. Thousands of people lined the shore, their colorful clothes bright against the blue water. They waved flags and cheered so loudly the sound bounced off the stone buildings. In the center of the water sat the Vasa, the most powerful warship ever built. It was a floating fortress, covered in hundreds of gold leaf carvings of lions, heroes, and kings. From this distance, the ship looked like a masterpiece of human effort. It looked unstoppable. It looked perfect. But if you could have zoomed in past the gold paint and the waving flags, you would have seen a different story. You would have seen the faces of the sailors. They weren't cheering. They were gripped by a quiet, cold fear. They had felt the ship wobble when the wind caught the sails. They had noticed how the massive boat leaned too far to one side whenever someone moved a heavy crate. Down in the dark belly of the ship, the builders knew the truth too. They had watched the king demand more guns, more weight, and more decorations. They knew the ship was top-heavy and unstable. Yet nobody said a word. The perfect ship was about to become a perfect disaster. As the Vasa moved away from the dock, a light breeze caught its foresails. The crowd roared. The ship moved about 1,300 meters, roughly the length of 10 city blocks. Then a slightly stronger gust of wind hit the side. The ship tilted. It didn't bounce back. Water began to pour into the open gun ports. Within minutes, the most expensive project in the history of Sweden sank to the bottom of the sea. The gold lions disappeared under the waves. The perfect ship was gone, not because of an enemy attack, but because of the weight of its own perfection. The trap of the golden ship. We often think of self-sabotage as a lack of effort. We think we fail because we are lazy or because we didn't try hard enough. The story of the Vasa shows us the opposite. Self-sabotage is often the result of trying too hard to make something perfect, because we are terrified of being wrong. King Gustavus Adolphus didn't want a good ship. He wanted a ship that would make every other king in the world feel small. He wanted a ship that was beyond criticism. When we are driven by this kind of perfectionism, we stop looking at reality. We stop asking, does this work, and start asking, does this look impressive enough to keep people from judging me? This is the core of the perfectionism procrastination loop. We are so afraid that our work won't be perfect that we either over-engineer it until it breaks, or we wait until the last possible second to start, so we have an excuse for why it isn't better. In the case of the vase, the king kept changing the plans. He wanted an extra deck of cannons. This was something that had rarely been done before. The builders knew the ship wasn't wide enough to carry that much weight high up in the air. But the king was the boss. To tell him the ship was unstable was to risk his anger. So the builders kept adding guns to a ship that couldn't even stay upright in a light breeze. We do this in our own lives every day. We spend 10 hours on a 3-paragraph email because we are afraid one wrong word will make us look unprofessional. We spend weeks researching a new hobby without ever actually doing it because we are afraid we will be bad at the start. Like the vase, we are building something beautiful on a foundation that cannot hold the weight. The basement ghost, that voice in our head that says if it's not perfect, you're a failure, is the one handing us the extra cannons. Elena's 12-hour icon. Elena Rodriguez sat in her home office in Austin, the glow of her dual monitors casting a blue light over her face. It was 3 a.m. She had been working on a single icon for a new fintech app for 12 hours straight. This icon was supposed to represent secure savings. It was a tiny image, barely the size of a thumbnail on a phone screen. She had tried 47 different shades of green. She had adjusted the curve of the shield symbol by half a pixel over and over again. Her neck was stiff and her eyes were burning. In her mind, this icon had to be the most beautiful, most secure-looking icon in the history of design. If it wasn't perfect, her boss would think she was losing her edge. If it wasn't perfect, the users wouldn't trust the app. Elena was building the vase. While she obsessed over the curve of the shield, the rest of the project was falling apart. She hadn't even started the main navigation screens. She hadn't tested the login flow. She was so zoomed in on one tiny detail that she was ignoring the fact that the whole project was about to sink because she was going to miss her deadline. Elena felt a sudden wave of exhaustion. She remembered the story of the Swedish ship. She looked at the tiny green shield on her screen. She realized that she wasn't making it better anymore. She was just trying to outrun her fear. The basement ghost was whispering that if the icon was perfect, she would finally feel like she belonged in her high-level job. She was using perfectionism as a mask to hide her imposter syndrome. She took a deep breath. She closed the design software. She realized that a good enough icon in a finished app is always better than a perfect icon in an app that never launches. Why perfectionism is a defense mechanism. Most people see perfectionism as a positive trait. They think it means you have high standards. But in the world of mental health, perfectionism is often a survival strategy. It is a way to protect ourselves from the pain of being judged, rejected, or criticized. If I am perfect, you can't hurt me. If I never make a mistake, I am safe. If the ship is covered in gold, no one will notice it's wobbling. This is why we overthink. Overthinking is our brain's way of trying to solve a problem before it happens. We think that if we can just imagine every possible mistake, we can prevent those mistakes from occurring. But the brain isn't a computer. It can't simulate every outcome. All it does is create a loop of anxiety that keeps us stuck in the harbor. The King of Sweden wanted a ship that would show his power. He was likely afraid of looking weak to his enemies. His shadow, the part of him that felt small or insecure, demanded that the ship be huge and decorated. He chose a fantasy ship over a real ship. When we sabotage ourselves through perfectionism, we are choosing a fantasy version of our lives. We want the perfect career, the perfect body, or the perfect relationship. Because the real version is messy and involves failing sometimes, we stay in the planning phase. We over-engineer our plans until they are too heavy to carry. Then, when we inevitably fail or get overwhelmed, we blame ourselves for not being good enough, when the real problem was that our goals were built for a world that doesn't exist. The 80-20th rule of mental health. To stop building Vesa ships in your own life, you have to embrace a concept called the 80-20th rule. In business, this rule says that 80% of your results come from 20% of your effort. In mental health, this means that most of the value you provide to the world and to yourself comes from the core of what you do, not the tiny details you obsess over. The Vesa didn't need 64 bronze cannons and hundreds of wooden statues to be a great ship. It needed a stable hull and a balanced weight. Those were the core elements. The rest was just noise. When you find yourself overthinking a task, ask yourself, what is the 20% of this work that actually matters? If you are writing a report, the 20% is the information and the clarity of your point. The 80% is the font choice and the perfect transition words. If you are cleaning your house, the 20% is getting the dishes done and the floors swept. The 80% is organizing your junk drawer by color. If you are working on your mental health, the 20% is showing up for yourself with kindness and practicing your breathing. The 80% is reading 50 different books on how to be happy without ever trying a single exercise. Focusing on the 20% feels scary. It feels unfinished. But it is the only way to keep your ship from sinking. The B- Work Challenge. One of the most powerful tools to break the loop of perfectionism is the B- Challenge. This is an exercise where you intentionally aim to do a task at a B- level instead of an A+ level. For a perfectionist, the idea of doing average work feels like a nightmare. It triggers the basement ghost. You might think if I do B- work, I'll get fired or everyone will see I'm a fraud. But the truth is that your B- is usually most people's A+. More importantly, doing B- work allows you to finish. Pick a low-stakes task. Don't start with your biggest work project. Pick something small, like writing a grocery list or replying to a text from a friend. Set a strict time limit. Give yourself 5 minutes. No more. Aim for good enough. Don't check for typos. Don't worry about being funny or smart. Just get the information across. Hit send or done immediately. Do not let yourself go back and polish it. Notice the result. Does the world end? Does your friend stop liking you? Usually, the answer is no. In fact, most people won't even notice a difference. By practicing B- work, you are training your nervous system to understand that you are safe even when you aren't being perfect. You are teaching your brain that the basement ghost is wrong. You don't need gold leaf carvings to stay afloat. Dealing with analysis paralysis. King Gustavus had too many choices. He had different ship designs, different gun sizes, and different artists. Because he couldn't choose, he tried to do everything. This led to analysis paralysis, a state where you are so overwhelmed by options that you either make a bad choice or no choice at all. Researchers once did a study about jam. They set up a table at a grocery store with 6 types of jam. Lots of people stopped and bought a jar. Then, they set up a table with 24 types of jam. More people stopped to look, but almost nobody bought anything. They were overwhelmed. They were afraid of picking the wrong jam, so they picked nothing. When you are sabotaging yourself through overthinking, you are standing in front of the 24 jars of jam. You are trying to find the perfect path. But in a world of uncertainty, there is no perfect path. There is only the path you choose and the path you don't. To break analysis paralysis, use the 2-minute rule. If a decision won't matter in 5 years, don't spend more than 2 minutes making it. What to eat for lunch? 2 minutes. What color to paint the spare room? 2 minutes. Which workout to do today? 2 minutes. Save your mental energy for the decisions that actually shape your life. And even then, remember the Vesa. A simple, balanced decision is always better than a complicated, perfect one that is too heavy to sail. The fear of being wrong. Why was the king so obsessed with the Vesa? Why were the builders so afraid to speak up? It all comes down to the fear of being wrong. In our society, we are taught from a young age that being wrong is a sign of weakness or stupidity. We get red marks on our homework when we make mistakes. We get laughed at if we say something incorrect in class. By the time we are adults, we have built a Maginot Line, a wall of defenses, to keep us from ever being wrong. Perfectionism is the ultimate wall. If I am perfect, I am never wrong. But here's the secret: growth only happens when we are wrong. The Vasa sinking was a tragedy, but it was also a massive lesson for the Swedish Navy. They realized they couldn't just build bigger ships, they had to understand the math of stability. They had to learn about the center of gravity. When you allow yourself to be wrong, you are actually collecting data. You are learning what doesn't work so you can find what does. Self-sabotage happens when we try to skip the learning part and go straight to the perfect part. We want the masterpiece without the messy sketches. Alina's turning point. A week after her 3 a.m. icon obsession, Elena had a chance to do things differently. She had a meeting with her boss to show the progress on the fintech app. Usually, she would stay up all night before these meetings, making sure every single pixel was in the right place. She would arrive at the meeting shaky, caffeinated, and defensive. This time, she stopped working at 6 p.m. the night before. She hadn't finished everything. She had B- versions of several screens. She felt the old panic rising in her chest. The basement ghost was screaming, "He's going to find out you're lazy. He's going to see you're not a real designer." She practiced her physiological sigh, the double inhale and long exhale. She told herself, "I am showing a work in progress." It doesn't have to be the Vasa. It just has to be a conversation. During the meeting, her boss looked at the screens. He didn't notice the B- icons. Instead, he pointed to a major problem with the navigation that Elena had missed because she had been so focused on the visuals. "I'm glad we're looking at this now," her boss said. "If we had waited until you finished it, we would have had to redo weeks of work. This early feedback is great." Elena felt a weight lift off her shoulders. By not being perfect, she had actually made the project better. She had allowed the ship to be tested while it was still in the harbor, rather than letting it sink in the open sea. She realized that her perfectionism wasn't helping the company, it was actually slowing them down. Letting the ship sail. The Vasa still exists today. In the 1960s, they pulled it up from the bottom of the harbor. Because the water was cold and lacked oxygen, the wood was perfectly preserved. You can go to Stockholm today and see it in a museum. It is breathtaking. The carvings are intricate and the scale is massive. It is, in many ways, a perfect museum piece. But it failed as a ship. It never did what it was built to do. It never protected the coast. It never won a battle. It was a beautiful monument to a king's ego and a builder's fear. You are not a museum piece. You are a living, breathing human being meant for the open sea. Your life isn't meant to be looked at and admired for its perfection. It is meant to be lived. It is meant to be messy, to tilt in the wind, and to learn how to stay upright through trial and error. The next time you feel yourself obsessing over a tiny detail, or the next time you find yourself paralyzed by the perfect choice, think of the Vasa. Think of the gold lions sinking into the mud because they were too heavy for the boat to carry. The goal isn't to build a ship that never tilts. The goal is to build a ship that is balanced enough to handle the waves. That balance doesn't come from more guns or more gold. It comes from the courage to be good enough, the wisdom to focus on what matters, and the strength to let the ship sail, even if it isn't perfect. You don't need to be beyond criticism to be worthy of success. You just need to be willing to leave the dock. The basement ghost will always tell you that the water is dangerous and that you aren't ready. But the ghost is just a part of the house you haven't visited yet. Invite it to watch you work. Let it see you make a mistake. Let it see you do B-work. The more you sail, the smaller the ghost becomes. The more you act, the less power the perfect fantasy has over you. Real life is found in the gap between what you think should happen and what actually does. In that gap, you aren't a failure or a fraud. You are simply a person learning how to navigate. And that is more than enough to keep you afloat. 6. What happens when the body says no? A small, leather-bound notebook sits on a heavy wooden desk. Its edges are worn thin from years of being tucked into coat pockets. Inside, the paper is yellowed and stained with ink. On page 36, there is a simple, shaky drawing of a tree. Above the branches, 2 words are scrawled in messy handwriting, I think. This notebook belonged to Charles Darwin. In 1837, those 2 words were the start of a secret that would change the world. Darwin had realized that life on Earth was not a series of separate creations, but a giant, growing family tree. It was a beautiful idea, but to Darwin it felt like a death sentence. He lived in a time when questioning the origins of life could ruin a man's name. His wife Emma was deeply religious, and he knew his discovery would break her heart. For 20 years he kept his notebook tucked away, hidden from the public eye. While the secret stayed locked in that notebook, Darwin's body began to fall apart. He didn't just feel worried. He felt broken. Almost as soon as he returned from his famous voyage on the HMS Beagle, a strange cloud of illness settled over him. For the next 4 decades he suffered from constant stomach pain, heart palpitations, and skin rashes that turned his face red and itchy. There were days he couldn't stop vomiting. Some mornings, his head spun so badly he couldn't even walk to the garden. He sought the best doctors in England, but none of them could find a physical cause for his misery. Darwin was a man who lived in his mind, but his body was screaming a truth he wasn't ready to speak. He once wrote to a friend that telling the world his theory felt as if I had committed a murder. Every time he picked up his pen to work on his book, his stomach would cramp. Every time he thought about the backlash his family would face, his heart would race as if he were running for his life. The ghost in the basement was no longer just making noise in the back of his mind. It was banging on the floorboards under his feet. Darwin's story shows us what happens when we try to bury our deepest fears, our hidden truths, or our self-sabotaging patterns. We think we can keep them locked in a notebook or a dark corner of our brain. But the body doesn't work that way. When the mind refuses to face a conflict, the body takes the hit. The 2 paths of the body. To understand why our bodies react this way, we have to look at 2 very different ways humans handle stress. Think of it like a pressure cooker. One version of the pressure cooker has a safety valve. When the steam gets too high, the valve whistles. It lets a little bit of the pressure out so the pot doesn't explode. In our lives, that safety valve is our ability to feel our feelings, speak our truth, and acknowledge when we are scared or angry. People who use their safety valve might still feel stressed, but the stress doesn't get trapped inside. It moves through them. The second version of the pressure cooker has the safety valve welded shut. The heat keeps rising, and the steam has nowhere to go. This is what happens when we use self-sabotage to stay safe. We hide our true feelings to avoid a fight. We procrastinate on a project because we are terrified of being judged. We tell ourselves we are fine when we are actually drowning in anxiety. When the valve is shut, the pressure has to go somewhere. It pushes against the metal walls of the pot. In a human being, those walls are your muscles, your gut, and your nervous system. Darwin was the cooker with the valve welded shut. He was so afraid of the social explosion his book would cause that he forced all that pressure inward. His stomach pain wasn't a mistake. It was the only way his body knew how to handle the murderous weight of his secret. This is the core of the mind-body connection. Your brain and your body are not 2 separate things. They are a single system. If you try to sabotage your own growth by staying small and silent, your body will eventually say no for you. It might say no through a migraine, a back spasm, or a crushing sense of exhaustion that no amount of sleep can fix.